Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 26th of December 2018. The topics to be covered today has been presented on the screen. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now, this particular article appears in the editorial page number 8. The title of the article is On a Shaky Foundation. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2 governance. Further, this particular article is also important because in previous year UPSC mains 2013 a related question has already been asked. Further, one expected UPSC mains question from this particular topic could be the section 69A of the IT Act imposes restrictions on the fundamental right of speech and expression on unreasonable grounds and also promotes the surveillance state. Discuss. Before analyzing this particular article, let us first look into its background. Now, the section 69A of the IT Act enables the government agencies to intercept the personal information of the people under certain conditions. In pursuance of the powers conferred on the government under the section 69 of the IT Act, recently the Union Home Ministry has issued a circular. This particular circular empowers 10 central agencies to monitor, intercept and decrypt the personal information of the people stored in any computer. Further, this particular circular also states that any person who fails to cooperate with these agencies shall face a imprisonment of 7 years. In this regard, this particular article here basically focuses on the criticisms of the government circular, wherein it mainly emphasizes 3 points. Firstly, it emphasizes that the government circular goes against the Supreme Court judgment in case Puttaswamy versus Union of India case. It is to be noted that in this famous historic case, the Supreme Court of India ruled that the right to privacy shall be a fundamental right and restrictions on right to privacy can be imposed only under certain reasonable conditions. Further, the article also states that the government circular imposes unreasonable restrictions on the fundamental right of speech and expression of the people. And lastly, the article highlights that the government circular goes against the principle of natural justice. Hence, as part of this video analysis, we shall basically focus on the criticisms of the government circular as highlighted in the article. Starting with the analysis of how the government circular goes against the Supreme Court judgment in the Puttaswamy case. Now coming to the first aspect of the article, in which the article highlights that the section 69 of the IT Act goes against the Supreme Court judgment in the Puttaswamy case. Now, in the landmark verdict of the Puttaswamy case, the Supreme Court of India ruled that the right to privacy shall be considered as a fundamental right under the Part 3 of the Indian Constitution. However, just like other fundamental rights, the right to privacy is not an absolute right, which means that certain restrictions can be imposed on the exercise of this fundamental right based upon certain reasonable grounds. Further, any government action which seeks to impose restrictions on right to privacy has to pass a 3 test laid down by the Supreme Court, which means to say if a government action fails to pass these 3 tests laid down by the Supreme Court, in such cases the Supreme Court can strike down the government action as unconstitutional and void. And these 3 tests are: firstly, the government action should be backed by a law. That means there should be a parliamentary approval for any government action which seeks to infringe on the right to privacy. Further, the right to privacy of the people can be violated only on account of a legitimate state aim. And thirdly, the Supreme Court has come up with the concept of doctrine of proportionality as one of the tests in order to check the constitutional validity of the government action. Now, the doctrine of proportionality basically means that there should be a rational nexus between the means adopted by the government and its legitimate state aim. So, the doctrine of proportionality basically states that the means adopted by the government, even for a legitimate state aim, should be based upon fairness and justness, and there should be no arbitrary action of the government even for a legitimate state aim. So the basic philosophy behind the doctrine of proportionality is that there should be a balance between the state's legitimate aim as well as means so that the state can pursue its aims with minimal effect upon the fundamental rights of the people. So the doctrine of proportionality seeks to promote harmony between the means adopted by the government as well as its legitimate state aim, wherein the means should be fair and just and they should not be arbitrary. Now, this particular article basically highlights that the Section 69 of the IT Act, which allows for the interception of personal data, does not pass the doctrine of proportionality which has been laid down by the Supreme Court in the K.S. Puttaswamy case. Now, this is because under Section 69 of the IT Act, there is lack of balance between the means adopted by the government and its aims, wherein the means adopted by the government are unfair and unjust and would lead to development of the surveillance state. However, it seeks to achieve far less serious aims such as prevention of incitement of offense, or it can even be used by the government to curb dissent of its policies through various social media posts such as Facebook, Twitter, etc. So, which clearly shows that the means adopted by the government are disproportionate to its aims. Hence, the article here suggests that the Section 69 of the IT Act is based upon the philosophy of disproportionate state action of creating a mass surveillance state in order to achieve far less serious aims such as the prevention of incitement of offense. Hence, in this regard, this article highlights that Section 69 of the IT Act goes against the Supreme Court judgment in the Puttaswamy case. Now, coming to the second aspect of the article, now in this particular article, the authors have argued that under Section 69 of the IT Act, unreasonable restrictions have been imposed on the fundamental right of speech and expression provided under the Article 19. As you all know, the fundamental rights are not absolute and certain restrictions can be imposed on the exercise of these fundamental rights on certain reasonable grounds. For example, under Article 19, which basically deals with the fundamental right of speech and expression, restrictions can be imposed on reasonable grounds such as the sovereignty and integrity of India, security of the state, friendly relations with other countries, contempt of court, defamation, incitement to offense, as well as public order. So one can clearly see here that restrictions can be imposed on exercise of fundamental right of speech and expression on the grounds of maintaining the public order. However, under Section 69, restrictions can be imposed on the exercise of fundamental right of Article 19 on grounds of preventing incitement to commission of cognizable offences. However, one main problem here is that section does not differentiate between the public order and law and order, which means to say, unlike the constitutional provision which enables reasonable restrictions on grounds of public order, Section 69 goes beyond to impose restrictions on law and order. Now, the difference between the public order and law and order can be considered to be in a form of hierarchy as enunciated by Supreme Court. And as you can see here, the hierarchy of public order and law and order can be seen in the form of concentric circles, where the outermost circle here corresponds to law and order, the middle circle corresponds to public order, and the innermost circle corresponds to security of the state. The relationship between law and order, public order, and security of the state can be understood by looking at an example. Now, any activity related to terrorism adversely affects the security of the state, that is the innermost circle, and hence it can also be considered as the law and order problem. Similarly, communal clashes between two religious communities is considered to be a public order, which is the middlemost circle, and the communal clashes can also be considered as the law and order problem. On the other hand, certain offences such as incitement to offences or minor clashes between the two religious communities are considered to be the law and order problems, that is the outermost circle. Hence, every situation in which the security of the state is threatened is a public order problem. Similarly, all the situations that lead to public disorder are necessarily the law and order problem. But all the law and order problems are not public order problems. Similarly, not all the public order problems hurt the security of the state. So what the Section 69 of the IT Act does is that it imposes restrictions based upon the law and order problem and not based upon the public order which has been provided under the Constitution of India. Hence, because of this, Section 69 of the IT Act cannot be regarded as a reasonable restriction on the fundamental right of speech and expression under Article 19. This is because the restrictions on fundamental rights can be imposed only on based on public order and not based upon the law and order. Further, as you know, under the principle of natural justice, people should be given an opportunity to be heard before passing verdict. However, the author of this particular article highlights that the section 69 of the IT Act violates this principle of natural justice. This is because section 69 compels the people to give up their personal information without giving them an opportunity to be heard. It is because of these reasons the author of this particular article highlights that section 69 of the IT Act is unconstitutional and hence accordingly it should be examined by the Supreme Court. So these are some of the aspects which one must know with respect to this particular article. Based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find the answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, on which of the following grounds can restrictions be imposed on the fundamental right of speech and expression provided under Article 19? And as we have discussed, the restrictions can be imposed on the grounds of the sovereignty and integrity of India, friendly relations with other countries, as well as the security of the state. However, the restrictions can be imposed on the grounds of public order and not on the grounds of the law and order. Hence, option 4 in this particular case is wrong. So, looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 1, 2, and 3 only. Similarly, as discussed, an expected UPSC mains question from the article which we have discussed would be the section 69A of the IT Act imposes restrictions on the fundamental right of speech and expression on unreasonable grounds and also promotes the surveillance state. Discuss. Now you can try writing answer to this question by going through our video analysis. So having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now move to the next article. The next article appears as an editorial on page number 8. The title of the article is Chabahar Tidings. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 International Relations under the subsection bilateral agreements involving India or affecting India's interest. Further, this particular article is also important because in prelims 2017, a question has already been asked with respect to the importance of Chabahar port for India. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because the Indian government has recently taken over the operations of the Shahid Basiti port in Iran. It is to be noted that this particular port is actually a part of the Chabahar port developed by India in Iran. Now, taking over the operations of this particular port by India is considered to be quite significant because India received a waiver on the Chabahar port from the US sanctions on Iran. Hence, accordingly, this particular article basically focuses on two aspects. Firstly, it highlights the importance of Chabahar port for India due to its geostrategic location. And secondly, it highlights as to what would be the potential challenges before India with respect to the Chabahar port. So as part of this video analysis, we shall basically focus on these two aspects, starting with the importance of Chabahar port for India due to its geostrategic location. As you can see in the map here, the Chabahar port is located in Iran along the Gulf of Oman. Now this particular port has huge strategic importance for India from multiple perspectives. Now Afghanistan is actually a landlocked country, which means that the trade between India and Afghanistan should take place through Pakistan. However, Pakistan has so far not given transit rights to India to transport its goods through its territory to Afghanistan. And hence this particular Chabahar port would enable India to bypass Pakistan. So the goods can be transported from the Indian coast to the Chabahar port, which then can be carried forward to Afghanistan. So this particular Chabahar port would provide an alternative route to reach out to Afghanistan through both sea as well as land. Now, in order to bypass Pakistan, India is planning to link Chabahar port through railway line to a place called as Zahedan in Iran. Further, Zahedan will be in turn linked to Zaranj-Dilaram highway, which is located in Afghanistan. The second reason for its strategic importance is its closeness to Gwadar port in Pakistan. Now this particular Gwadar port has been constructed by China. So Indian presence in the Chabahar port can be used by India to counter Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean region. It is also important because almost 20% of the crude oil passes to this particular strait. So enhanced Indian presence in this particular strait would ensure its energy security. The third reason for its strategic importance lies in the fact that the Chabahar port would ensure greater trade between India and landlocked Central Asian countries, for which the government has already proposed that the Chabahar port would be linked to international north-south transport corridor in future. The international north-south transport corridor is a multi-nodal network which seeks to transport goods through network of roads, ships and railways. Now this particular transport corridor shall be interlinking multiple countries such as Russia, Central Asia, Iran, India as well as Europe. And hence the Chabahar port along with the international north-south transport corridor would enable India for its greater economic integration with Central Asian countries, Russia as well as Europe. And hence in this particular context, this particular port becomes extremely important for India's perspective. Now coming to certain challenges before India with respect to Chabahar port. As most of you know, US has imposed certain sanctions on Iran. However, looking at the geostrategic location of Chabahar port, US has given a waiver for the development of Chabahar port by India. However, the author of this particular article has raised a concern that such a waiver given by US could be withdrawn later, which means to say this article has raised certain doubts related to the long-term Indian presence in the Chabahar port. Secondly, US has recently decided to pull out its troops from Syria, which clearly shows that US intends to reduce its global footprint. Hence, accordingly, there is a possibility of US withdrawal even from Afghanistan in future. And accordingly, there is a possibility that the Afghan Taliban may come to power in Afghanistan. And hence, it raises security concerns for Afghanistan, which may in turn impact the Chabahar port. So this clearly shows that if Afghanistan comes under the control of Afghan Taliban, it may have adverse impact on the Chabahar port developed by India. The third concern raised in this particular article is that recently countries such as US and Russia are attempting at reconciliation with the Afghan Taliban, wherein these countries are trying to engage in the bilateral talks with the Afghan Taliban. And the concern raised by this particular article is that countries such as US and Russia need to rely on Pakistan because Pakistan can act as a facilitator of talks between the Afghan Taliban and these countries. So greater reliance of Pakistan on the reconciliation with Afghan Taliban would lead to a greater say of Pakistan on regional affairs, including the development of Chabahar port by India. So this clearly highlights that the greater say of Pakistan on important regional matters, including the reconciliation with Afghan Taliban, would adversely affect India's development of Chabahar port. So these are some of the challenges which have been highlighted in this particular editorial. Based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the Chabahar port. The first statement is, this port is located on Gulf of Aden. Now, as you can see in this particular map, the Gulf of Aden is located along the Somalian coast, whereas the Chabahar port is located along the Gulf of Oman. Hence, this particular statement is wrong. The second statement reads as, the development of this port would facilitate greater trade between India and landlocked Central Asian countries. And as we have discussed, this particular statement is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. Similarly, based upon the discussion which we had, a main question for your practice would be, even though development of Chabahar port presents India with opportunities, there are long-term concerns related to this particular port. Comment. Now you can try writing answer to this question by going through our discussion. Further, coming to the prelims question asked in prelims 2017, the question here was, what is the importance of developing the Chabahar port by India? And as we have discussed, by developing the Chabahar port, India will not be dependent on Pakistan for access to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Hence the correct answer to this question is C. So having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now move to the next article. Now coming to the next article on page number 1. The title of the article is Government's Draft Rules to Regulate Social Media Echo Supreme Court Orders. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 3 Security under the subsection Challenges to Internal Security through communication networks as well as role of media and social networking sites in the internal security challenges. Now in our DNS dated 7th of December 2018, I have discussed as to how the social media sites such as Facebook, Twitter and WhatsApp have been used to polarize the Indian society, wherein the social media has become a tool to spread fake news and to spread the communal hatredness in India. So, because of the internal security challenges posed by various social networking sites, the government has now come up with certain draft rules in order to regulate the social media. And one expected UPSC mains question from this particular article would be the social media has to be regulated in order to curb and stop the dissemination of fake news which lead to the internal security challenges discussed. So as part of this video analysis, let us understand the draft rules framed by the government in order to regulate the social media. And for those of you who would want to understand as to how the social media polarizes the Indian society, please go through this DNS dated 7th of December 2018. The Government of India has come out with the Draft Information Technology Amendment Rules 2018 in order to regulate the contents on the social media. And this particular draft has been prepared by keeping in view various Supreme Court judgments relating to the contents on social media such as the fake news, child pornography, etc. Hence, in this regard, let us understand the salient features of these draft rules one by one. Now, the draft rules prescribe that the various social media intermediaries should have to provide information to the government with respect to the security of the state, the investigation of any offense, as well as the information related to the cyber security. Further, the social media intermediaries are under an obligation to provide such a information within 72 hours upon the communication received from the government. So these guidelines clearly show that the social media intermediaries are required to provide the necessary information to the government agencies. Further, all the social media intermediaries are required to appoint a nodal person for contact for 24/7 coordination with the various law enforcement agencies such as police. Further, if any unlawful content is found on the social media platforms, then in such cases, either a court or an appropriate government agency may direct the social media platform to remove the unlawful content. Hence, upon a direction issued by the court order or being notified by the government agency, the social media platforms are required to remove any unlawful content. The draft rules also stipulate that all the social media platforms have to publish rules as well as privacy policy in order to stop the users from posting any kind of material which is deemed as unlawful in nature. Now, these materials could be related to fake news, child pornography, or any kind of message that would seek to promote communal hatredness. And in case of publication of any unlawful content on the social media intermediaries are required to trace the originator of the message. Now, the originator here means a person who sends, generates, or transmits any kind of electronic message which is deemed to be unlawful in nature. Lastly, all the social media platforms are required to report cyber security incidents to the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. It is to be noted that this particular agency acts as a nodal agency to handle all the incidents related to the cyber security. Now, the points which we have discussed here can be cited by you when you are writing an answer relating to how the social media in India has to be regulated. So, based upon the discussion which we had so far, this question would be your mains question for the practice. In order to answer this question, I suggest you to go through this DNS dated 7th of December 2018 and also highlight the draft rules which we have discussed now in order to substantiate your answer. With this, let us now move to the next article. Now, the next article appears on page number 7. The title of the article is 30 million newborns cry out for help. This particular article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 Governance under the subsection Issues related to the development and management of health. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper because recently UNICEF and WHO have come together to publish a report known as Survive and Thrive report. This particular report basically focuses on understanding the causes of death of the newborns across the world. And in this regard, this particular report has given certain suggestions in order to transform the care for the vulnerable newborns. And as you can see here, this particular report has highlighted that across the world, there has been death of 2.5 million newborns, out of which India accounts for 0.6 million deaths. And this higher death of the newborns can mainly be attributed to the low birth weight of the babies. Now, why this becomes extremely important is because under the Sustainable Development Goals adopted by the global community, all the countries are required to reduce the neonatal deaths, wherein the target is that all these countries bring down the death of the neonatals to 12 deaths per 1000 births. And if you look at India, presently India faces 25 deaths of the newborns per 1000 births. Hence, providing a transformative care for the vulnerable newborns becomes extremely important for India in order to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by the end of 2030. Hence, in this regard, this particular report has given certain suggestions in order to reduce the death of the newborns and to enable the countries to meet the Sustainable Development Goals for the neonatal deaths, wherein it has emphasized on mainly 3 points. Firstly, it has highlighted that the death of most of the babies across the world is on account of preventable causes such as prematurity, infections and congenital conditions. So since majority of the deaths of the babies has been attributed to preventable causes, it becomes easier for the government to identify these preventable causes so as to reduce the death of babies. Hence, accordingly, in order to reduce the death of babies due to these preventable causes, the report has suggested that the governments across the world have to focus on bringing about a transformative change in their healthcare system. And as part of this transformative change, the governments need to design the cost effective solutions for their healthcare and provide the people with a universal health coverage. Further, this particular report has highlighted that the amount of investment in health by the low income countries and the developing countries is extremely lower. Hence, in this regard, the report has highlighted that the government should have to spend more amount of money. This is because the greater amount of investment in health can avoid the death of 1.7 million babies across the world. So these are some of the important highlights of this particular report. So having analyzed all the aspects related to this particular article, let us now move to the next article. After going through some of the articles in detail, let us now look at the news snippets which will be important mainly from the perspective of prelims. Now the list of articles which are important for the exam from today's Hindu newspaper has been updated on the Rouse IAS website. Let us now start analyzing the news snippets one by one. Now coming to page number 14, which is basically the business section. The article which is important from the exam perspective is the article with respect to the year of disruption for the banking sector. Now this particular article highlights that banks in India have seen a sharp rise in the accounts which are classified as the special mention accounts. So from the perspective of prelims, one would be required to have certain basic understanding related to the special mention accounts. The special mention accounts are basically the loans given by the banks that have potential to become the non-performing assets. And the concept of special mention account has been introduced by the RBI for the early detection of loans which are presently under the stress, and this would enable the banks to take the corrective actions. So what you need to remember here is that the special mention account is not a non-performing asset. However, these are stressful accounts which have potential to become the non-performing assets. For example, as you know, the non-performing assets of the banks are those loans on which the interest or principal is due for a period greater than 90 days. However, the special mention accounts are those loans whose interest or principal is due for a period less than 90 days, which clearly shows that the special mention accounts are those loans which are under the stress. Further, the special mention accounts are categorized into SMA 0, SMA 1 and SMA 2, where SMA 0 corresponds to those loans which are due for a period less than 30 days, whereas SMA 1 are those loans which are due for a period 31 to 60 days. And finally, the SMA 2 are those loans which are due for a period greater than 61 to 90 days. Now this clearly shows that if the interest or the principal is not paid on an account which is categorized as SMA 2, automatically the SMA 2 would be categorized as the non-performing asset by the bank. So these are some of the important aspects which one must know with respect to special mention account. So based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for your practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the special mention account. The first statement is, the SMA is a non-performing asset of a bank which has very high exposure to the banking sector. As we have discussed, the special mention account is not a non-performing asset. Hence, this particular statement is wrong. The second statement reads as, the classification of loans as SMA enables the banks to take corrective action against the loans which are currently under the stress. And as we have discussed, the second statement in this case is right. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. Now coming to page number 13, from this particular page, the article which is important from the exam perspective is banks under the PCA sitting on a cash pile. Now the concept of prompt corrective action has been comprehensively been covered in our DNS dated 21st of December 2018. Now this particular article here basically highlights that the 11 public sector banks which are currently under the prompt corrective action framework have seen a higher cash supply, and this is on account of two main reasons. Firstly, presently there is a restriction on lending of these public sector banks currently under the prompt corrective action. And the second reason is because these public sector banks have seen an increase in the deposits in the recent times. However, as there is a restriction on lending of these banks, they are unable to use the depositors' money to give away the loans. Hence, accordingly, these public sector banks have used the depositors' money to buy the government securities, leading to an increase in their SLR holding. Now, SLR basically here stands for the statutory liquidity ratio, which is one of the monetary policy tool used by the RBI to control the amount of money supply, wherein SLR corresponds to the percentage of depositors' money which the bank should always keep with themselves in the form of cash, gold or the government securities. So based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for the practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the SLR. The first statement is, the SLR is the percentage of depositors' money which the banks are required to keep with the RBI. Now this particular statement is wrong. This is because the SLR corresponds to percentage of depositors' money which the banks are required to keep with themselves. However, CRR, that is the cash reserve ratio, is a percentage of depositors' money which the banks are required to keep with the RBI. So one major difference between the SLR and CRR is that the SLR has to be maintained with the banks themselves. On the other hand, the CRR has to be maintained by the banks with the RBI. The second statement reads as, the SLR is to be maintained in the form of cash, gold and government securities. And as we have discussed, this particular statement is correct. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. And the next article which is important from page number 13 is foreign fund outflows highest since 2008. Now this particular article basically highlights that the year 2018 has seen a highest outflow of foreign portfolio investment after the 2008 financial crisis. Now this clearly shows that a large number of foreign investors have withdrawn money from the equity market in the year 2018. And as you can see in this particular graph, the year 2018 has seen a highest outflow of foreign portfolio investment since the year 2008. From the perspective of prelims, one would be required to have certain basic understanding related to the differences between the foreign direct investment and the foreign portfolio investment. Now the foreign investment coming into India is basically categorized into the FDI and FPI. A foreign investment is stated to be FDI if a foreign company sets up its operations entirely on its own or in a partnership or in a tie-up with an Indian company. For example, the government of India has imposed sector-wise cap or limit on FDI, wherein under the IT sector, the FDI limit applicable is 100%, which means that a foreign company can entirely set up an IT company on its own. However, if you look at the insurance sector, the present applicable limit is 49%, which means that a foreign company can invest maximum up to 49% in an insurance company, and the remaining 51% of the investment has to come from an Indian company with which the foreign company requires to have a tie-up or a partnership. So FDI is a form of investment where a foreign company can set up its operations entirely on its own, as in the case of IT sector, or in a partnership with the Indian company, as can be seen in the insurance sector. On the other hand, foreign portfolio investment is a form of investment wherein the foreign entity merely buys the shares which are issued by an Indian company. So we can clearly see here that under FPI, the foreign company is not setting up a company. Rather, it is just buying the shares which are issued by an Indian company. Further, you need to note that the Government of India has accepted the recommendations of Arvind Mayarang Committee with respect to the definition of FDI and FPI, wherein a foreign investment of 10% or more in an Indian company shall be treated as FDI by Government of India. However, a foreign investment of less than 10% shall be treated as FPI. So these are basic differences between the FDI and FPI. So based upon the discussion which we had so far, this would be a prelims question for your practice. Please pause this video and try to find answer to this question. We will be discussing the answer after 5 seconds. The question here is, consider the following statements related to the FDI and FPI. The first statement is, under FPI, the foreign company gains both management and ownership rights, whereas under FDI, the foreign company gains only the ownership rights. Now, as we have discussed, under FPI, the foreign company is merely buying the shares of an Indian company, which means that under FPI, the foreign company gets only the ownership rights by buying the shares. However, it does not get the management rights. On the other hand, if you look at FDI, under FDI, a foreign company gets both the management as well as ownership rights. Hence, this particular statement is wrong. The second statement reads as, the FDI is considered to be stable and long-term investment, whereas FPI is considered to be unstable and short-term investment. Under FPI, the foreign company is buying the shares of an Indian company. So whenever there is small decline in the value of shares, the FPIs tend to sell off their shares, because of which the FPI is considered to be unstable and short-term investment. So looking at the options here, the correct answer to this question is B, that is 2 only. Now coming to page number 7. From this particular page, the article which is important is 260 leopards poached since 2015. Now this particular article basically highlights that between 2015 to 2018, around 260 leopards have been poached, wherein the largest number of poachings have taken place in the states of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. And the main reason for the poaching is because the leopards live in a close proximity to the human habitation, which makes them prone to the man-animal conflict. So in order to reduce the man-animal conflict, this particular article has recommended that the government has to evolve proactive policies in order to ensure protection of wild animals who are living outside the protected areas. Now this clearly highlights that the government has so far focused on protection of wild animals only within the protected areas, and it has neglected the protection of wild animals which are living outside the protected areas, and hence accordingly there is a need to evolve proactive policies for the protection of such wild animals. With this, we have come to end of today's discussion. Now let us look at the question for the day.